Hey everyone. So we are talking about matching paint colors, and it might not be what you think. There are several websites out there that claim to give you a process for finding paint color dupes. There's Match My Paint Colors, there's Plan Home, there's Encyclopediya. The number one question you should be asking is, where does that data come from? Because garbage in equals garbage out. And we don't know. They don't disclose that. So it's all about disclosure when it comes to anything to do with color science. And it's about standards. What standards did they follow? Now, looking at some of these websites, not anyone in particular, but in general, looking at these websites, what I think has happened is they have downloaded free files that many paint brands offer. And they've taken those files and then they've created some kind of algorithm. The problem is those free files and that free information is using the wrong numbers. That's why those resources are free. Now, the purpose of many of these websites really isn't to give you accurate color information in any way, shape, or form. The goal of those websites is to be a landing page where they house links for affiliates and ads, right? Their intent is to make money. So while they don't have a subscription to access them, they really aren't free to you. In fact, they're kind of expensive because they aren't giving you the best answers that they could be giving when it comes to anything about the paint colors. And they're not using the correct information. So in some cases, the answers or suggestions that they're giving just are often left field, right? Not even in the right ballpark sometimes. And then you're going and you're investing in samples. You're clicking their sampleized links and you're buying the samples, right? They have no interest in getting the color recommendation right. Their goal is to get you to click on the things they want you to click on. So I'm going to show you an example. And this came up on a forum, and I thought it would be a good view into behind the scenes with me, so I can show you the right way to go about this process and just how dramatically different the results are when you're using the right system. And this is something that I've trained color strategists to do for over a decade. So let's get into it. Let's see, where do we want to start? I am going to share my screen and we're going to go to one of those websites. And this example that I want to talk about that I saw that inspired this whole video was this person wanted to get a dupe of pale powder made at Sherwin-Williams because they didn't want to buy Ferro and Ball. Why they didn't want to buy Ferro and Ball, I don't know. Maybe it was the cost, maybe it was access, there wasn't a store. People want to do color matching for all different reasons. And of course, all of the brands will tell you that they can color match at anything, and that's not always true. And I'm going to show you how we can predict if a brand would be able to make a dupe of a color. I'm going to show you that. But let's take a look at the results that this website gave for the closest paint matches to pale powder. Their first one is Brook Green by Behr. And then they have 5 more. Okay, so remember that. Brook Green is their answer. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and I'm going to go show you why that's not a good answer at all. And I'm going to share another screen and we are going to go to the paint color DNA table. where I have pulled all of their suggestions into this one view so we can take a look at the numbers, and I can show you why brick green is a terrible recommendation. This is the paint color DNA table on thelandofcolor.com. I'm not going to get into all of the details about how to use the filters and how I arrived at the answer, the better answer that I'm going to share with you in terms of what's the best dupe for pale powder. That's a tutorial for another day, and I do teach you about these values inside my 4 pillars of color course. So really what we have here on the paint color DNA table are 2 sets of data. We have LCH, which is lightness, chroma, and hue angle. And then we have the Munsell notation, which is hue, family, value, chroma. And then last we have LRV. And again, I'm not going to get into all of the details about what these 2 sets of data notations are about and what they mean. For this video, just for this comparison, we're going to focus on hue angle. So hue angle is basically the street address of a color in color space. And so this number is the house number. And just like addresses in your neighborhood, when you look at the address, you can gauge how far apart the houses are. Hue angle does the very same thing. So we can take a look at how close these colors are to pale powder based on their street address inside color space. So if we scroll down to brick green, we see why it's such a problem, why it's not a good recommendation that that website had ranked as the number one closest color match to pale powder. It's not even in the same hue family. Pale powder is in the green yellow hue family. The family column here just makes it simple so you can just read what hue family a color belongs to. Brick green is in the green hue family. And then if we take a look at the address, the hue angle, we can see just how far apart they are and why the families are different. Pale powder has a hue angle of 130. Brick green is at 147. Now, in the paint color DNA table, you can put columns in order just by clicking these black triangles. So I did. I put all of these colors in order by hue angle so I could see how far apart their suggestions were from pale powder's street address in color space at 130. So brick green is the farthest away, yet that was their number 1 recommendation. So, my recommendation was pine frost. Going back to the question that started this whole conversation, she wanted to know if Sherwin-Williams could make pale powder. Well, as the color strategist, we can answer those questions. We're able to predict if another brand has a reasonable shot at making a duplicate of another color. And that's what I did. And I found pine frost. So to answer her question, yeah, Sherwin-Williams has a decent shot at making pale powder because they have pine frost. If the brand you want to use has a color with very similar characteristics to your target color, in this case is pine powder, then it's worth making the investment in a quart to see how well they do making that duplicate. The other alternative is when we take a look at the numbers and we see just how close they are, right? 130 to 131.8. Pine frost is very close to pale powder in color space. You can make the decision to maybe just use pine frost and don't mess with trying to get a color match to pale powder. And then you can make those determinations, make that decision by taking a closer look at the color characteristics, like chroma. Pale powder has a chroma of 5.5. That tells you how neutral the color looks. Pine frost has a lower chroma number at 5.0. So that tells you that pine frost is a little more neutral, a little more grayed than pale powder. And in terms of lightness, pale powder's at 87 and pine frost is at 85. So in terms of lightness value, how light or dark a color looks, these two are very close. So that's why just going with pine frost just might be the easier option. But if you have your heart set on pale powder, Sherwin-Williams can probably make that for you because we took a look at the data. And I'm not going to go into the details of how I determined that, but if you were to hire a color strategist, hire me or another color strategist that I've trained, this is a glimpse into the process that we use to get you those quality, accurate color answers, which, as you can see, are in stark contrast to what you're going to get from one of those free websites. And of course, working with a color strategist isn't going to be free. But in addition to other benefits of, having a session with them and getting their input, they're going to give you the right answer about the basic stuff. Like, can Sherwin-Williams make this color? And what is the best dupe for my target color? And they can help you with all the other things about where to put the colors and finding trim colors to go with it. So let me show you what my answer would have looked like if this person would have asked me instead of going to that website that they went to. This is the color strategy that I would have given them. So we're going to leave the paint color DNA table, right? Again, this is at thelandofcolor.com. It is a subscription. This is a professional color tool. So you're getting kind of a behind the scenes look inside how we are able to manage huge color collections from paint brands and get the answers that we do. Anyone can subscribe to the paint color DNA table. I have a short tutorial up here that talks about how to use the operations for these filters. And I also have these helpful info bubbles for you too. But there aren't any training videos or specific tutorials. Again, this is a tool that's used by trained color professionals for the most part. But if you are an ambitious homeowner, it's pretty easy to navigate and figure out actually when you're in here. And you are welcome to subscribe too. So we're going to leave the paint color DNA table. And now I'm going to show you the color strategy that I would have delivered had they asked me. So I have to open my PowerPoint to do that. And let me go over there. And here it is. And this is what the color strategy would have looked like. So going through my process, using the table, which I didn't show you, there's two good answers for her. Again, pine frost, just get a sample of pine frost. But Sherwin-Williams can make your pale powder, probably. And the other suggestion was Emmy's Room from Magnolia Home. I have Magnolia Home colors in the table too. I have about 30 colors in there. But you can see that Emmy's Room sits at 128.5. Its street address is pretty close to pale powder. Chroma is the same, but it's a little darker than pale powder and pine frost. So really getting all three of these chips to compare would be what I would suggest. And then based on the chips, you can decide what sample you want to invest in. So let's go take a closer look again at what that website recommended. So here are the 6 that you saw on the website. Brook Green was 1. Healing Aloe was in 2nd place. Blanc de Chêne was 3rd. Wayward Willow was 4th. Pine Frost, the best option in my opinion, was 5th, ranked 5th. And Quiet Mint was 6th from Valspar. this is a good example of all of the brands we have in the table. PPG, Farrow Ball, Sherwin-Williams, Valspar, of course, Benjamin Moore. We have Behr. I have other smaller boutique ones like Backdrop and Color Is. There are a few other ones in there. Again, this isn't a tutorial about the table. We're taking a closer look at what this website recommended for dupes for pale powder. And really, Q angle is the biggest tell. Wayward Willow at 114.5. It's very far away from pale powder at 130. Quiet Mint is probably the best one. And again, it's ranked 6th, but it's the closest in terms of hue family and hue appearance. The problem with Quiet Mint is it has quite a bit more chroma at 6.1 compared to pale powder's 5.5. And her whole point was the current color that she has, I believe it was Benjamin Moore's Sea Salt, which is kind of like a near neutral grayish kind of color. She said it was a little dead in that room, so she was looking for more color. So Quiet Mint might be worth getting a sample just for that reason, because it's the closest in terms of hue family, and it has a bump more chroma even than pale powder. So for comparison, for chips, Emmy's Room, like I said, pale powder, Pine Frost, Quiet Mint, those would be worth pulling chips, and then you can decide where you want to invest in a sample. But other than that, the suggestions that came from that website aren't even worth pulling a chip for, right? And again, those websites have a different objective than what you might think. And it's not to give you the best answers to paint color questions like, can a brand make a dupe? Is there another color that's close? When you're inside the paint color DNA table, you can pull all of the colors that are close, really close, not like their suggestions, but legitimately close to that street address of your target color. And you can look at the lightness and you can compare it, and you can look at the chroma, which is how much color or how much gray a color has, and compare. And if you like to use LRV, we also have that column of LRV, so you can compare LRV in one view. I don't use LRV. LRV just tells you how much color, how much light color reflects. LRV does not tell you how light or dark a color looks. And that's the other thing I saw on one of these websites. They had an LRV scale, and they had the higher numbers marked as white or off-white. LRV doesn't tell you anything about how white a color looks. There are some yellows that are very chromatic, very saturated yellows that have LRVs up in the 80s and 90s. So those websites in general just have issues. I'll just say issues. Some of them attempt to explain how they do their color matches. And, at first glance, looking at that about page, it's obvious to me that they're not only using the wrong numbers, their math is wrong. Their algorithm is wrong for what colors look like in real life. And I suspect that they are downloading their data for free. That's the question asked. Where did that data come from? How are they qualifying these matches? What lighting source are they basing these matches on? In real color science, you first have to establish the illuminant, the quality of light that you're using to make these comparisons, that you're using to compare color, that you're using to define color, that the light source that you're using to categorize colors into hue families. And there's none of that on these websites. Many brands have free files that you can download of their paint colors with color numbers, right? Certain data formats like RGB values, and they're free for a reason, right? If you can download it for free, that should give you pause. But I believe, my best guess, not that I know anything, I believe these websites are doing that. They're getting these databases of the free values that are not useful in defining or describing what color looks like to people. And then they're creating these algorithms and doing all of these things to create these websites that give you these walls of numbers. Like, the one website said, we have every code you can imagine. Well, you don't need every code, color code, or scientific data value you can imagine. What you need is LCH and Munsell hue value and chroma, which is why those are the only two sets of notations I have on the DNA table. So it's definitely a matter of garbage in equals garbage out. And that's just amplified by the processes that these websites are implementing to create these programs that have the illusion of providing color matches. And then on another website, they use data values called HSL, which is hue, saturation, and lightness. And that is not the same as the data values I showed you, the notations that I showed you on the paint color DNA table. If you ask AI about the color space named HSL, you'll understand why I'm making this video and warning you about using those websites. Encyclocolopedia, Plan Home, Match My Paint Color. Don't do it. Don't even go there for a hex code, right? The hex codes are equally as tragic. I have hex codes for you on the DNA table. It's worth a subscription if you just want to get hex codes because you're making paint blobs or paint dots for a mood board. Because we calculate our hex codes, right? We're not eyedroppering the hex code from a dot that we found on Pinterest, or we're not getting them from the paint brands themselves. So I'll talk about the hex codes really quickly because I've had the DNA table for many years, looking at the data very closely, and it is a subscription. So I have a certain amount of accountability to ensure the integrity of the data on my table. And so we were getting the hex codes from the paint brands just for consistency, because I figured, well, if someone's looking up pale powder on my website and they see my swatch, my digital swatch, at least for consistency, I'll use the same hex code as Faro and Ball, so our digital swatches will match on that person's device, right? And then a few years into this, I finally had time to look at that a little more closely. And long story short, I would not use an eyedropper. I would not use the hex code from a paint brand. So we deleted all of that. That was a ton of work that we had done. And I changed it. And so now we measure colors, right? We measure everything here at the Land of Color. Here's my spectrophotometer that I use. We measure each and every color. And I'm using my data, my measurements to calculate the hex codes. So there's no such thing as an official hex code or an official RGB value, which is another reason why these websites are just really an exercise in futility, because the data is not good. But calculating a hex code from the original color measurement is about as close as you can get to an official hex code. And the reason why there's no such thing as an official RGB value or a correct hex code is because those data values are not modeling human color vision, right? They don't have anything to do with how a color shows up in a space and how we see it. Those data values are just instructions for machines and computers. It tells them how many of the pixels of red, green, and blue they need to light up to make a digital representation of an in real life color. And that leads us to the conversation about AI. And that's all I'm going to tell you. So I have 5 minutes, so we're going to wrap this up. AI can't help you with this either. The reason why AI can't help you is because AI has training data. The training data is just what it has scraped from the internet. So every stupid blog post, every insipid color review that exists on a blog is what is in AI's training data. So anybody who's ever written anything about color, a paint color, is in this bucket that AI is looking at. And AI doesn't look at that bucket the same way twice. So you ask it one question about pale powder in one prompt, and it's going to look in the bucket. And the first time it looks, it might say, oh, this is the thing that people say about pale powder over and over again. This is what they say the most. So I'm going to put this in my answer to you. And then the next time you go back to ask about pale powder, it's going to look at that bucket of information a little bit differently. And it's just going to decide, well, the way she asked the question, it seems to be more about how light the color looks. So now I'm going to say this about pale powder. And it reinterprets the information in its bucket. And AI does not understand color science at all. So if you try to say, hey, can you give me the LCH values or the Munsell value for pale powder? It can't, but it's going to give you an answer. It's going to make it up. I don't know how. It's in the algorithm. It's going to collate what it does know about the color, and then it's going to make its best guess. And it can only guess about the pixels that it has in its training data bucket about that color, right? So it's making its best guess based on the pixels in its training bucket and based on what other people have said about the color. That's why what you get from AI is a hot mess about anything to do with color. It can't, you cannot do color online. You just can't. And then you have people who promise to do e-design, right? Who say that they can do color consultations online. You just send them a picture, and based on the picture that they see on their device, they can make color recommendations. Well, it's the same problem. Kind of different circumstances, but it's essentially the same problem as AI, right? AI can't see color. Online color is not accurate. So you have these people doing online color consultations telling you that you can't trust AI. And then they go into the reasons why AI can't get color right. And at the same time, they're contradicting what they're trying to sell you, which is an online color consultation. So you can't have it both ways. Either online color works or online color doesn't work. And that's one thing that AI is kind of exposing, is kind of those inconvenient truths that people have been kind of trying to talk their way around. A lot of double talk. And they've gotten away with it, right? Because people never really understood what color online is not accurate meant. However, being inside AI and asking AI to paint your house Stratton blue and then you see the results that you get from AI, then it opens up the conversation for them, and they're in a place where they can understand why color online doesn't work. And so now people are connecting those dots. It's like, but hey, this person's been saying for 20 years that they can do online color. But this is AI. This is AI. Ooh, AI, but AI can't do it. And so then you can see the gears turning. So it's not a bad thing, but that is one benefit. One thing that AI has done for color is it's making people ask those harder questions and connecting dots for people that never connected before. I do virtual consultations, but I do it completely differently. It's actually a patented system, part of a patented system. My entire ecosystem is actually either patented or patent pending. I have another one pending, but I send you a kit and I can show you what the kit looks like. This video isn't about the kit. This isn't about my consultation process, but I'll show you quickly. This is what it looks like. This is what I send people. I send you a color measurement tool, and you have to send me the data values. And that's my patented system, that whole thing. And then I send you back a color strategy, answering whatever questions or creating whatever color design plan we need to create for your project. So it's a process. Everything is systematized, and it's a little bit of work. But if you can learn how to read a clock, you can learn how to do what I do, and I do that in the 4 Pillars of Color course. But just be very wary of any of those online color palette generators. They're essentially color calculators that are using the wrong numbers. Be very careful when you're using Encyclocolopedia, even for a hex code, and definitely don't use them for LRV values. LRV values is a whole conversation as well. Similar to hex codes, I don't use the LRV values from the paint brands. It's a similar story. We calculate our own LRV values based on our measurements. So when you're comparing LRV values inside the paint color DNA table, it's about as meaningful as it can get. You shouldn't be comparing LRV values anyway. That's another tutorial for another day as well. But LRV is not what you think it is either. But at least if you're inside the paint color DNA table, you're working with LRV values that will give you the best shot at seeing something useful in those values. Let's put it that way. But if you have any other questions, just let me know. And I don't know when I'll do another live, but it was nice to see you. I'll talk to you later.